Voor ons begin wil ek jou vinnig herinner aan al die potgooi-reekse wat ek by betrokke is. Daar's natuurlik klipkouers wat fokus op Afrikaanse entrepreneurs en impakmakers, boerpot wat fokus op die besigheid van landbou, Nostalgooi, my nuutste reeks waar ek gesels met legendes van die Afrikaanse vermaaklikheidsindustrie, mense soos David Kramer, Anton Goosen, Sandra Prinsloo ensovoorts. En dan my 2 nuwe potgooi-reekse, Buscrash wat die Engelse boetie is van klipkouers, en dan Pot of Gold wat gefokus is op die besigheid van mynbou. As jy in Pretoria is, kom maak gerus 'n draai hierop by ons plek in die Aard 21 Corporate Park, genaamd Bouma at 21, waar ons 'n café het, ons het coworking space, ons hierdie raadsaal uit en my atelier is hier. So, as jy is, kom drink gerus 'n koffie en kom sê hallo.
Hierdie is 'n potgooi produksie deur nommer 7 Media.
Hierdie is potgooi episode 3 van 8 episodes van Agri SA se 2019 Kongres. Minister Thoko Didiza was aan die woord en sy is die Minister van Landbou, Grondhervorming en Landelike Ontwikkeling. En sy het veral gefokus op die visie vir groei in die Suid-Afrikaanse landbousektor.
Congress, it's a great honor for us to welcome the Honourable Minister Thoko Didiza. Let's give her a great round of applause. Now, the Minister has a very impressive CV. It's about 2 or 3 pages here, but I then just went over to her and said, Minister, do you want me to read your CV? And she said, no, just introduce me as a former Bonsmara cattle farmer. And I don't know whether the biggest problem is with the Bonsmaras or the biggest is with the former. But let's say the biggest is with the former. And Minister, just on a serious note now, I think the whole of the agricultural sector was extremely delighted when you were appointed as the Minister again. The whole sector has a lot of confidence in you, and we need somebody now in this age and time. We need a strong leader in agriculture. We need somebody with experience, and you bring that to the table. We also know that you're a straight shooter. And I've said to the Minister now, please tell the farmers not what you think they should hear, but what we need to hear. So, Minister, from my side, we want to hear from you what your vision is for your department, for agriculture, and may this be the beginning of a long and prosperous relationship between you and Agri SA and ASUF and all the other members, the whole lot of us. And from my side, welcome. And you have the podium now, and you can address the Congress. Welcome. Let's give it a great round of applause.
Thank you very much, Danny. The President of Agri SA, our Program Director next to me, members of the Executive Council from respective provinces, leadership of Agricultural Business Chamber, agricultural stakeholders present, members of Agri SA, all of you who are here in your various capacities, members of the media, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen. I must say that I'm humbled to be here amongst you. I can see even some of the former members of Parliament who have joined the agricultural sector. It means there's something good that we are doing, that we have been able to attract one who has been in the parliamentary benches to actually come and work in this industry. Hope itself is a star not to be seen in the sunshine of prosperity and only to be discovered in the night of adversity. These are the words by Charles Haddon Spurgeon. President, I have opened my remarks with this statement because I appreciate the difficulties that we're experiencing in the sector at the present moment. Some of these constraints are as a result of weather conditions that has seen some of our regions experiencing prolonged drought that have left many farmers indebted, and impoverished. The economic situation which we are experiencing have seen negative growth in the sector. The animal disease outbreak has not assisted as well. Farm security is another challenge that we're experiencing, both in terms of murder as well as stock theft and other challenges that we've been facing. The list of our challenges is endless, but we must not lose hope. Charles Haddon Sargent reminds us that hope is like a star not to be seen in the sunshine of prosperity and only to be discovered in the night of adversities. Mr. President, it is an honor and privilege that I accepted your invitation to this Congress. I also wish to thank you and your membership for welcoming me back into the agricultural sector once again. I'm fully aware that there has been many challenges, and therefore I appreciate that this will be a period in which I have to familiarize myself with developments that have taken place locally in the region and globally. So I'm kind of old, but also new. 13 years is no mean feat. Many things have changed. I'm looking at some of the old members of Agri SA that I used to know. We are all aging. Don't be fooled by the little black, your majority of black hair and little white spots that are there. It's showing of age how long we've been here. But also I'm seeing some new faces which represent hope for the future, the younger generation that are joining the sector, which therefore means there's hope for agriculture in the future. As a nation, we're 4 months into the 6th administration of our democratic dispensation. The President, in his State of the Nation address in June this year, has outlined 7 priorities that will guide our intervention as a government, as well as making announcements on the reconfiguration of the state, which has a measure of some departments and ministries. Of importance has been his commitment and that of his government in building partnership with all stakeholders in resolving the challenges that our country faces. Similarly, the commitment in improving collaboration and coordination within government will also ensure that there is better alignment. The President has also impressed upon all of us to address matters with agency as we serve our society. Some of you might have heard him saying, "Khawuleza." Chairperson, the vision that has been guiding the sector thus far remains relevant even today. I still remember many of you when we were trying to say what should be the vision of agriculture. And that process was very inclusive of all the agricultural stakeholders that we have. We said we wanted a united, prosperous agricultural sector in South Africa that is competitive and inclusive. And I think that vision, even if we may want to revisit again, its fundamental elements are still true today, because I'm sure all of us will want to make sure that agriculture is a business that can survive even the toughest of times. Our unique history as a country compels us not to abandon the transformation agenda that remains important to this day in order to build a humane society. Equitable access to our natural resources is a matter that needs to be addressed without acrimony. I'm aware that the land issue remains a matter around which, in the discourse, sometimes we tend to lose one another. But it is a matter, in my view, that impacts on all of us, even though in different ways. And therefore, it means it's a matter we must address. I do hope that the parliamentary process that is reviewing Section 25 of our Constitution will conclude this process sooner in order to create certainty for all of us. President Ramaphosa, in his State of the Nation address, pronounced that government for itself would release government state land for human settlement and agriculture. The Interministerial Committee, led by the Deputy President, has been working on the identification and profiling of state land that can be released both for these purposes. The first phase of these processes has actually seen some fruits being born. 100 parcels of land by Public Works and Infrastructure Department has been released for restitution. Tomorrow, the Interministerial Committee will be meeting to look further on how much more land can the state release. In order to make a meaningful contribution in the economy, there are few issues, in my view, that will require our attention. Policy certainty, regulatory environment, looking at the issues of market opportunities and international trade in particular, institutional capacity and capability are some that, in my view, we will need to address collectively. President and members, our President has highlighted the importance of government working together with our citizens, be they individuals, private sector, or labour. Of interest has been the prioritization of agriculture as an important sector that can make a contribution to economic growth and job creation. Will remain a critical sector in our country that provides food security for the nation, that has got the largest capacity in absorbing people into the employment, as well as contributing in the economy directly to the GDP, but also indirectly because of the many permutations that the agriculture face. I remember in my past life as a Minister of Agriculture, together with the then Minister of Minerals and Energy at the time, our Executive Director for Women in the United Nations, Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, we used to say, if it's not farmed, it's mine. So anything is in between. But also, our new Minister of Minerals and Energy, Minister Gwede Mantashe, has a very nice saying, and he always reminds people wherever he meets them and say, the farmer is the first person when you wake up and greet, and the last one you meet before you go to bed. Because all of us have to eat our breakfast and have to eat our supper. So, in that sense, it affirms the centrality of this sector, not only in the economy, but also in the survival of our citizens. Chairperson, agriculture and mining has played an important role in the industrialization in many countries. We too are the witnesses of that fact if we look at our own history as a country. The sector's contribution in the economy is not only measured in its direct contribution from primary production, but it actually permeates in a number of processes down the value chain. And therefore, having been identified as an important sector of this economy, there are certain issues that we need to look at and say what it is that we need to do. Global competition for market access for agricultural goods is even more a challenge that we must address. We need to look at innovative ways on how we build relationships with the countries, not only at a political level, but also look at how we can expand the reach for our agricultural goods. I'm happy that further work has been done, particularly in East Asia, for some of our products, such as in beef and in fruits. I know the Fruit SA has accompanied the Minister of Trade and Industry when he went to Japan last month, and they actually had good interactions with the industry at that level. But also, there are prospects, though there would also be challenges in terms of the African Continental Free Trade Area. I think this is one of the biggest markets that we can take advantage of. particularly when it comes to the agribusiness sector and value addition. I also know, though, that this is one of the areas where competition will also be immense, particularly on primary agriculture. When one looks at the area of grain, when one looks at the tea, particularly from Kenya and others. However, this must not deter us from looking at the things with hope. We would need to strengthen our regulatory environment, particularly our sanitary and phytosanitary measures, so that as we undertake these processes, we have a good framework from which we can spring. Issues of innovation is another matter that we have to reflect upon. Digitization in agriculture is no more a dream, but it's a reality. We can't wish it away, but we must find a way in which we have to adapt and maximize those technologies for our advantage. Climate change is another area of importance that we need to reflect upon. In my view, and I'm sure to you too, it's no more a phenomenon under debate in the boardrooms, but it is real and requires us to improve and develop our adaptation strategies. The promise of innovation and technology, therefore, and their application in the production system will offer opportunities that will ensure that we actually adapt in this area too. It therefore means adaptation would not only be required as a response to climate change, but also to digitization in the agricultural space. Mr. President and members, in the past 2 quarters of this year, our contribution as a sector to our GDP has declined. There are various factors that account for this, given the impact of climate, particularly if we look at the regions such as the Northern Cape, which has been experiencing climate change for almost 6 years now. What do we need to do to play a meaningful role that has been assigned to us by our heads of state? In my view, we would need to quickly assess whether the long-standing policy that we have developed over the years is still relevant to today. This is necessary given the realities that we are faced as a country, but also the changes that are there in the global economy. We also need to look at the development of an agricultural master plan. Yes, there will be different subsectors that we would have to look at, but I think we've reached a point where we need to say, what is our agricultural sector strategy in terms of what we need to do going forward? It is my considered view that this plan will enable us to see investments coming into our agriculture. In this plan, we also need to look at possible new industries that can adapt to the changing climate. We also need to look at the new industries that can be farmed, that can give contribution towards industrialization, particularly in the medicinal and other sectors. I'm looking at some people who are coming from the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal. In the area of Lusigisigi, they've always farmed with the green gold. In Zulu, calling it umthunzi weinkuku. And they've made money. They've taken their children to school, albeit that this was illegal. In KwaZulu-Natal, in the Bergville area, in the area of Emangwaneni, they too even opened up regional trade with umthunzi weinkuku, with Lesotho as our neighbor. I will never forget one day when I went to meet the farmers in Bergville, and they were complaining about stock theft which was an area of concern for me too. And there was one old man who was sitting at the back of the room, and he was smiling. So I said, Baba, can you please give us your wisdom? How do we deal with this matter? So he laughed. He said, my child, I agree there is a challenge with respect to stock theft. But in the main, some of us here use the Basotho nationals to trade with the green gold. Because they are very good in going through the mountains. You see, when you look at the Mount Oxus is there, the fence is not so strong, so they can go and come back with the moolah. But some of us don't pay them. And because our dogs know them very well now, they would come in the night and take the cattle and go away. So I looked at the reaction of the people in the room, and they were all smiling and looking down. So I said, well, there's something that we need to do about this. But I'm mentioning those areas because they represent the future in terms of what are the possibilities for looking at new development areas in agriculture. But it is in these areas that we also have got challenges of infrastructure. If you look at our eastern seaboard, particularly Wild Coast, the OR Tambo region, and if you look in KZN, in some of the areas around Bergville, land is very good, very fertile. The rains, good. But the challenge is infrastructure development, which then inhibits, the utilization of that land to its maximum. The second issue is tenure reform. That is a challenge in South Africa's rural areas that must be addressed. And I know that this is the conversation that we need to have with our traditional leaders and their communities, so that one can allay some of the fears that are there about the different forms, or rather the choices of other tenure systems than what they know. But what is interesting to me is that albeit those difficulties of tenure reform, some of the industries in the sector have actually looked at that area and look at how they can invest. Whiphold is one of those that have been investing for the past 3 years now in Ntane in maize production. I know my brother here, Patrice Motsipe, has been working with the rural communities of our country. Grain South Africa, I know they've also done some work partnering with agriculture even in the rural areas. So as the wool and the sheep farmers in some parts of our country. So in a sense, while these express challenges in how we look at them today, they also, are the lights for hope from which we can build. And I think when we look at this agricultural master plan, we also need to push the envelope in how we think about South Africa. But for me, we are intertwined with the region, particularly the Southern African region. We need to start to think about how we actually think sub-regionally as a country in order to grow. I know in the sugar industry, they started to do some of this work sometime, except that the downside has also been some import of sugar from Swaziland. So when we were working with the sugar industry, with the minister, I said, now how do we deal with this reality? Because in South Africa, as the Lovo and Tongat, this is a challenge. But it comes from some of your plants, just across the border from where my mother comes from, So how do we manage this dilemma? But be that as it may, it shouldn't make us fear to look at regional opportunities that are there and they are open to us. I also want to share with you that though we are not yet at the moment developing an agricultural master plan, we've been looking at certain industries that are facing some challenges in our country together with the Ministry of DTI, the poultry and the sugar industry. We know that as a country we have bilateral relations with the United States through AGOA, which has actually had some positives but also negatives when it comes to agriculture, in particular the poultry industry. It has also opened us up to other markets who have also sent their poultry to South Africa. It has also opened us up for dumping from other markets. And I think that's the reality that the poultry industry is actually experiencing. So we've been working with them, and I hope before the end of this month we would have concluded. One of the things we have been engaging the sector about is, given these challenges, how do we look at the opportunities that may be there? How do we start to have an export orientation also as an industry? How do we start to look at the chicken not as a whole nice chicken for our Christmas oven? You know, when you have stuffed your chicken, it looks nice. But in other markets, they actually don't need your full chicken. Maybe they need a leg quarter or they need a wing. So maybe we need to start to say, what do we as South Africans like for our braai, and what do the others want that we actually not like that very much? So we can price higher what we don't like and maybe make it affordable for the local economy. But what it means is looking at the various ways in which we can deal with the industry. Similarly with sugar. Sugar with the health levy has had an impact into the sector. But the structure of the industry itself has been experiencing some changes. The difficulties in the eastern seaboard, particularly of soil acidity, has seen Tongaat moving into the housing, or rather property development space. At the same time, competition has had its own impact. We've seen some of the milling companies experiencing some of the challenges. So we said, let's sit down with this industry because it's still important for our country. How do we help it to adjust? Working together with them, not government sitting in its little corner and making the decision for the industry. So that has been a very interesting process, and I'm sure we will be able to take a leaf from that way of working on other areas that will require partnership between the government and the industry if we are to survive. Issue of agricultural financing. It's another area that remains a challenge. We've seen the difficulties that have been experienced by farmers because of the cost of financing agriculture. I know that financial institutions are still there, but unfortunately, the price at which farmers have to borrow, I can see nodding of hands, farmers are agreeing with me. So we need to look at innovative ways in which we must make financing accessible to our farmers. Not that we want to erode, economic livelihood for the banks, but we also say the farmers need to find working capital that will make it to succeed. As government, as you know, we've been looking at the blended finance. And I was saying when I was speaking to Afasa, on hindsight, I wondered whether was the wisdom for us to close the Agricultural Credit Board and give that responsibility to Land Bank. You see, it's affirming that, yeah, we all say in hindsight, maybe. So we are looking as government at a possibility where we can have a financing model that would allow for grant as well as a loan system. But we will not be able to do it alone as government. We will need partners from the private sector to do so. I'm looking at my brother, not with both eyes directly to him. I've heard he's made nice announcements about what he's working at, and I hope, Patrice, you and the financial institution are going to come to the party in this regard. And I know his heart and his mind and his passion is on the right place, because he too is a farmer. So he knows what we're talking about. So we are not leaving you alone. We will work with you, but we're saying send the message to those partners that you are working with that this is an important partnership that we need to work at with government and yourselves to make it possible for the farmers. Agricultural financing, it's another matter. That in my agricultural insurance, it's another area in terms of financial services, in my view, that we need to look at. We have seen with the challenges that we've had how difficult it has been to rely only on disaster fund from the state. It tries, but it's not enough. So we need to look at how we actually try to increase our platform in that area. I also want to look at the issue of safety and security. One of the challenges that we continue to face is the safety of our farmers and farming communities. And of importance is when we look at this area, it affects everybody who is in the sector. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter the scale of operation. On Sunday, I was in Tabanchu with Memuroka. She said just last week, she lost 74 of her head of cattle through stock theft. They've had some attacks in the area that has made it difficult for some of the people to continue in the production space. We know every day, there is one challenge or the other in one part of the region that impacts on farming community, not just in terms of attacks, but where we lose life. Where we lose even one life in the agricultural sector is actually having a negative consequences in our production. Because it's not only the family or the sector that has lost one farmer. It actually creates fear for those who are participating in the industry. That's why it is important for me that as a Minister of Agriculture working with the Minister of Safety and Security, we need to look at how we continuously strengthen rural safety, working together with the farmers so that indeed people can be comforted that they can work in this sector. The issue of market access and international trade remains an area, in my view, that we would need to also work at together. Looking at new markets, but also strengthening our foothold where we really are. One of the things we've been working on with the Minister of Trade and Industry is how do we ensure that we don't have a negative impact in terms of what is happening in the European Union, particularly with Brexit. So we are doing some work bilaterally with the UK, but also collectively with the Union, to ensure that we still retain that trading bloc that we have been having for so many years. But there are also opportunities that are opening in the Middle East. We need to understand that market fully and see how we can actually enter that market. Of interest is that in the Middle East, they've got very little space for production. So it's not for exotic, products that they would import anywhere in the world. It's basically for food security. So we need to start to think smart and understand that industry and how together as government and the private sector we can expand our reach. That goes for East Asia. Again, it's another market which offers opportunities for our agricultural industry. But all of those market opportunities that are there would require a very strong institutional capacity in government. So we are working and we will be approaching you so that we can form partnership in strengthening our biosecurity and in strengthening our sanitary and phytosanitary measures. I also want to say the issue of statistical information is another area that is important in my view. Because without understanding some of the data that is required for planning, we may not be able to do the best. I'm sure, Yanni, you would still remember, de Villiers, 1 year, President Mbeki called all of us in one room because our crop estimates was way out of line with what ended up happening when harvesting came, which actually showed the weakness in government that we needed to address. The issue of agricultural research and veterinary services, it's another area that, in my view, will require our investment as a state, but also partnership so that we can leverage the expertise that are there in the private sector with those that are there in government. Actually, we are joined at the hip. We've got no choice of not working together. We just must. The last issue, which will bring me to a close, it's inclusivity. It's one important area that we can't avoid. But at the same time, we shouldn't window dress. We must allow an organic process of working together as a sector, regardless of gender, race, or class. And I think it is possible. There are those areas that we can work together. And some of you have actually been taking a lead in certain areas. I met last week, week before, farmers from Elliot who were saying to me, this is who we are, Minister. I'm sure 13 years ago, you actually never thought we could come and meet with you as this collective. We do fight as, little children would fight in a family, but we are working together. And they were saying to me, in Elliot District, you now have got 40% commercial African farmers in that region. And that is the success that all of us must celebrate. Because it is because of the partnership that in that district, farmers developed and appreciated the interdependence and the coexistence that must exist in order for the sector to succeed. In the wool production area, I know that there has also been partnerships at local level amongst the farmers. So I'm saying it is there. We just need to make sure that we improve and strengthen it. I know at an organizational level, at times we would want to represent different constituencies. That is important. But also we must be able to find a way in which, as a sector, we narrow the divisions, but speak as an agricultural sector of South Africa. To that end, I would like to revive what we used to have: quarterly meetings with the agricultural sector, so that we can assess how we're working, support one another, be able to raise key policy issues that you want government to address. So that dialogue is necessary. At times we will agree, at times we will differ and agree to differ, at times we will say TBC, to be continued. Because sometimes allowing 1 month or two, you go back and say, in hindsight, I think she or he was right. And we can go back on the table again. But that engagement is also necessary for the success of the industry. We're not doing it just because we think we must have a forum to meet and talk. We are doing it because we have got a collective leadership in ensuring that this sector survives. And it's necessary because there are things that where you sit, you may be experiencing them from a different vantage point than where we are as, the policymakers. Again, I'm happy the Director General is here. We'll have to revive that CEO interaction so that they can meet often to resolve the needling challenges that are there. And if we're able to do that, in my view, we will be able to move, a step further. But I've got one challenge to Agri SA: gender representativity. Yeah, I can see Mbogoto clapping hands. I know you are trying. I said one time, some of you who were there, I said, who manages your farm when you keep on meeting the Minister of Agriculture? They said, farm managers. I said, from who does a farm manager take authority in that farm when you're alone? It is Madame. So Madame, who's not here, is my constituency because she runs that enterprise when we are here in the Kongres. I'm sure if I were to ask some of you which animal has calved today, which animal was stuck in a mud, you will say, Minister, wait, and pick up a phone and phone Madame to say, anything wrong that happened today? But some of you, in those enterprises, it's not only Madame, it's the daughters that are ag economists and agricultural scientists that work in those industries. But somehow, in the counting of whether they form part of the agricultural sector? I'm not sure. So the gender debate, it's my first agenda item in our meeting with you. Because we need to make a deliberate effort of ensuring that we also attract women in the agricultural sector, not only in primary production, but in the entirety of the value chain. I can see there's youthful faces here, which means you are trying at that level. So I need to pressure you a little bit on gender. Danny, let me wish you and your members a successful agricultural Congress for 2019. Thank you.
As jy gehou het van die potgooi, deel dit asseblief met vriende en familie. Of besoek ons webwerf by www.agrisa.co.za.